Say tree to a dog. Does a tree appear in its mind? Or is tree just a sound that predicts the park? Today, we're testing what animals truly understand. Dogs that know hundreds of names, cats that learn while ignoring us, a parrot that answered questions, and dolphins that proved word order matters. One final animal may even use name-like calls. Like the video, subscribe to Wild Wonders, and let's begin. For a human, the word tree is not attached to one exact tree. You can hear it in an empty room and think about something that is not there. You can recognize an oak, a pine, a tiny sapling, and a cartoon drawing as members of the same broad category. You know that tree names a thing. It is not an order to perform an action. And you can place the word inside completely new sentences, such as, "The tree beside the red house fell during the storm." All of that feels effortless, but it hides several different mental abilities. An animal may recognize the sound of a word without knowing its meaning. It may learn that the sound predicts food, a walk, or trouble. It may connect the sound with an action. It may connect it with one specific object. It may use the sound for an entire category of objects. Or, in the rarest cases, it may even understand that changing the order of several symbols changes the message. Those are not the same achievement. Imagine that every time you shout, "banana," someone opens a door. After a few hundred repetitions, you would probably react to banana near that door, even if you had no idea what a banana was. The sound would be useful because it predicts an event. That is why a dog racing toward the hallway after hearing walk does not by itself prove that the dog understands walk as we do. The dog may recognize the word, but it may also be reading your pitch, your shoes, the time of day, the direction of your eyes, or the tiny movement of your hand toward the leash. Animals are exceptionally good at using clues humans do not realize they are giving. So scientists have to make the game harder. They hide the speaker, they remove gestures, they play recordings, they say familiar words in unfamiliar situations, they show the animal the wrong object after a word, and they ask whether a label can survive when the usual routine disappears. The first surprise is that animals can receive a message from our voice even when we do not use a real word at all. In a recent experiment, dog owners hid behind a screen and repeated a meaningless syllable while changing only the way it sounded. They tried to communicate combinations similar to "yes, come here," "yes, go there," "no, do not come here," and "no, do not go there." The dogs had never been trained on that invented syllable, yet patterns in pitch, smoothness, loudness, timing, and repetition helped the dogs respond appropriately in many trials. That is important because it exposes the oldest layer of vocal communication. A rising, smooth, inviting sound can pull an animal closer. A rougher or more forceful sound can push it away. The voice can carry approach, avoidance, approval, urgency, location, and emotion before a dictionary ever enters the picture. So when your dog reacts to a sentence, part of the message may be inside the words, but another part is riding on top of them like music. Dogs' brains can separate those layers to some degree. In brain imaging experiments, dogs listen to familiar praise words and neutral words spoken with either praising or neutral intonation. The patterns of brain activity showed that the learned sound sequence and the emotional melody were not treated as one inseparable signal. Different parts of the auditory system contributed to processing the word-like information and the prosody. But there is a catch. Recognizing that one familiar sound pattern is special is still not the same as opening a mental dictionary. The word may be stored roughly, and dogs do not always care about every speech sound as much as humans do. In one experiment, dogs heard a familiar instruction, a completely different nonsense word, and a nonsense word that differed from the instruction by only one sound. Their brains distinguished the known instruction from the very different nonsense word. But the response to the one-sound mistake was much more similar to the response to the real word. A later brain imaging study found a related pattern. Familiar commands produced evidence of meaning, yet slightly altered versions of those commands were processed surprisingly like the real words. For a human listener, changing one sound can transform tree into three, coat into goat, or sit into a meaningless mistake. Dog word forms appear to be more coarse-grained. They can recognize an important sound pattern without storing every phonetic detail with human precision. That gives us a strange answer to the question, do dogs hear words the way we do? They hear the sound, of course. Their auditory system can analyze human speech, but the mental boundary around a familiar word may be fuzzier. Your dog may understand the general acoustic shape of a command while being less concerned about a small pronunciation error that would be obvious to you. Dogs can also notice patterns far larger than one word. In one scanner study, their brains responded differently to natural and scrambled speech and to familiar and unfamiliar languages. The language difference tended to be stronger in older dogs with more exposure. Your dog is not secretly translating every household conversation, but its brain may detect when a speech stream no longer follows the patterns it has heard for years. Now we reach the more difficult test. Can a real word activate the meaning of an action even when the dog is not allowed to perform it? Researchers placed trained family dogs in an MRI scanner and played familiar action instructions. Some commands involved movement through space, such as coming or going. Others involved remaining in place or lowering the body, such as staying or lying down. The dogs also heard meaningless sound sequences. The dogs had to remain motionless. They could not solve the task by simply performing the command. Even so, familiar action words activated not only auditory regions, but also regions connected with movement and motor control. Even more interesting, commands with more similar meanings produced more similar neural patterns. Words involving locomotion clustered differently from words involving little or no locomotion. That is much closer to meaning than a simple starting gun. The word did not merely trigger a visible routine. While the dog remained still, the brain represented something about the kind of action the word referred to. Does come feel exactly the same to a dog as it does to a human? We cannot know that from a scanner. The study does not reveal a private movie playing in the dog's head, but it supports the idea that a familiar action word can activate a mental representation of the action itself. In other words, some real words are not just noise to dogs, but action words are only half of the puzzle. Most dogs learn sit or come far more easily than the names of objects. A command is connected to the dog's own body and to an immediate response. A noun asks the dog to understand that an arbitrary sound stands for something in the world. This brings us back to the tree. Suppose a dog has a toy called dragon. When you say dragon, does the dog simply remember the action of fetching? Or does it mentally expect that particular toy, even when it is not visible and no one has asked the dog to move? A remarkable experiment tested almost exactly that distinction. The next question is whether an animal's word can extend beyond one individual object. If a dog knows one rubber ball called ball, that label might function more like a personal name. It could mean that exact possession and nothing else. To resemble the human word ball, the dog should apply the label to unfamiliar balls that differ in size, color, smell, and material. This is where the most gifted word-learning dogs become fascinating. Rico, a border collie, knew labels for more than 200 objects. When a new object was placed among familiar ones, and Rico heard a new name, he often selected the unfamiliar object. He appeared to reason by exclusion. Every known object already had a known label, so the unfamiliar sound was likely to belong to the unfamiliar thing. Rico even retained some of those new connections weeks later. Then came Chaser, another border collie, who learned the individual names of 1,022 objects over years of training. The impressive number is not the most important part. Chaser could separate an object label from an action instruction. The object word told her what the human was referring to. A different word told her what to do with it. She also responded to broader category labels, including a label that grouped her many named objects as toys. That distinction is essential. If ball always means run and grab, it may be difficult to tell whether ball names an object or commands a routine. But if the same object can be fetched, touched, or otherwise acted upon according to a second instruction, the label behaves more like a noun. Chaser was extraordinary, and that word matters. An even newer study found that a small group of gifted word learner dogs could acquire new object labels by overhearing humans interact. The dogs were not always the direct target of the lesson. They listened, tracked the connection, and later used the new label. That resembles one route through which young children learn. Children absorb words from conversations happening around them, not only from formal teaching. Again, this ability was found in rare dogs already known to possess large object vocabularies. It is not evidence that every sleeping dog beside the sofa is secretly memorizing the name of every household item. but it suggests that in exceptional individuals, a human word can become portable information. It can be learned socially, stored, and used later. This is why talking button videos are so tempting. Research suggests that trained dogs do not press entirely at random, and some two-button combinations appear more often than chance would predict. That supports deliberate use, but not yet human-like grammar, or an inner monologue translated one button at a time. There is also a funny technical problem. Tiny button speakers can distort speech. In tests, dogs recognize live words best and performed worst with the tested buttons. A button may be a useful tool. It is not a magical subtitle for a dog's thoughts. Now consider cats. Cats create a special problem for science because understanding and obedience are very different things. A dog may hear its name and sprint across the room. A cat may hear its name, rotate one ear 3 degrees, and continue doing absolutely nothing. Researchers tested cats by playing several similar words until the animal's responses faded, then playing the cat's own name. Many cats renewed their attention, usually through small movements of the ears or head. They could discriminate their names from matched nouns, and in some conditions from the names of other cats, even when the speaker was unfamiliar. That does not prove that a cat's name means, "I am this individual," in the rich human sense. It may mean, "A human is directing attention towards me," or simply, "Something relevant usually follows this sound." But the cat is not merely reacting to the owner's voice. The sound pattern itself matters. Cats may also learn labels that humans use for other individuals. In homes with multiple cats, researchers played the name of a familiar companion and then showed a photograph. When the spoken name and the face did not match, household cats looked at the image longer, as though the result violated an expectation. The cats had apparently learned that one repeated human sound went with one particular social individual. They were not formally trained. They had simply lived inside human conversations. In another experiment, cats briefly experienced invented spoken labels paired with animated images. When researchers switched the pairings, the cats looked longer. They had rapidly formed a sound picture association. That is not yet a lasting vocabulary, and it is not proof that a cat treats the sound as a full noun, but it shows that cats can learn structured information from human speech remarkably quickly. Your cat may understand less than you hope, more than it reveals, and exactly enough to know that your request is optional. Parrots force us to confront another mistake. Perfect imitation is not the same as understanding. A recording can repeat a sentence flawlessly without knowing what any part means. The African grey parrot Alex was interesting not because he could copy human sounds, but because his answers changed with the question. Presented with objects that differed in colour, shape, and material, Alex could respond to questions about the requested property. The same object could require one answer when asked about colour and another when asked about shape or material. He also answered questions about what two objects had in common or how they differed, including with unfamiliar combinations. That flexibility is hard to explain as one fixed sound attached to one fixed scene. The vocal label colour did not name a specific red block. It pointed toward a dimension along which many different objects could be compared. Same and different referred to relationships, not to one item the parrot could touch. Alex also used labels for objects, colours, shapes, quantities, requests, and refusals. In some tasks, he used a response meaning none when the requested similarity or quantity was absent. He was not having unrestricted human conversations. His communication system was limited, his training was intensive, and one exceptional parrot cannot represent an entire species. But Alex demonstrated something crucial. A copied human sound can become a usable symbol when an animal applies it flexibly to new combinations and answers according to what is being asked. Then there are dolphins, which could not pronounce human words at all. Two bottlenose dolphins, Phoenix and Akeakamai, were taught artificial communication systems. One received computer-generated sounds through an underwater speaker. The other received gestures made by a trainer. The symbols represented objects, actions, agents, and modifiers, and they could be combined according to learned rules. The dolphins followed instructions containing between 2 and 5 symbols. They succeeded not only with memorized combinations, but also with new combinations they had never encountered. Most importantly, order could change meaning. Imagine a system in which the equivalent of "take the hoop to the ball" requires a different action from "take the ball to the hoop." The same objects and the same action appear in both messages. Only the roles and the order change. The dolphins handled reversible relationships like these. One learned a left-to-right ordering rule, while the other learned a different, inverse rule. That showed that the sequence itself carried information. They also generalized symbols to different examples of an object, followed instructions after the relevant objects appeared only later, and, in one case, correctly indicated that a named object was missing. This is powerful evidence for symbolic reference inside a limited, artificial system. A signal could stand for an absent object. A label could extend to new examples. Several labels could combine, and order could determine who did what to what. That is much closer to a sentence than a dog hearing walk. But the dolphins still learned a small, carefully trained command system, not an open-ended human language. Sometimes, the most important information in our speech is not the word at all. Horses can remember individual human voices and connect them with positive or negative experiences. They also notice when the emotion in a human face conflicts with the emotion in a voice. Wild elephants have gone further. In one population, they use speech cues linked with a human speaker's community, sex, and age when deciding how defensively to react. They were not translating the sentences. They were asking, who is speaking? Is this kind of person dangerous? For survival, that may matter more than the literal topic. So what does an animal understand when you say, look at that tree? Your dog may recognize the emotional tone and whether the message invites approach. It may notice your gaze and body direction. It may recognize one familiar sound pattern. If tree has been trained as an object label, it may expect a particular object or category. If the label has never been taught, the word itself may carry no lexical meaning at all, even though the rest of your behavior communicates plenty. And if the animal has learned the label, its meaning probably does not match yours in every detail. Words are not photographs transferred from one brain to another. They are pointers built from experience. For you, tree may point towards shape, biology, memories, metaphors, and facts learned in school. For a dog, a learned equivalent might point towards scent, texture, location, action, and reward. For a parrot, a label might become part of a system for answering questions about color or material. For a dolphin, a symbol might identify an object whose role changes according to its place in a sequence. The external referent can overlap while the internal experience remains different. And now we reach the animal promised at the beginning. For centuries, humans have asked whether animals can learn our labels. But wild African elephants may use individually specific, name-like calls of their own. Researchers analyzed elephant calls and found that the intended receiver could be predicted partly from the acoustic structure of the call. The pattern did not appear to depend simply on copying the receiver's own voice. In playback experiments, elephants responded more strongly to calls that had originally been directed toward them than to calls directed toward another elephant. The cautious phrase is name-like. The evidence does not show a complete human naming system, and it does not reveal exactly which acoustic element performs the addressing, but it suggests that one elephant can produce a call designed for a particular individual, and that the intended individual recognizes the difference. That changes the direction of the entire question. Maybe animals are not only learning that some of our sounds point toward things, some may create their own vocal pointers toward one another. So, does tree mean tree to an animal? Usually no, not automatically. Human speech is not translated inside an animal's head simply because the animal lives near us. Sometimes a familiar word is mainly a prediction, an instruction, or a rough sound pattern tied to a routine. But some animals go further. Dogs can form mental expectations of named objects. Rare dogs can learn hundreds of labels and extend some to new objects. Cats can connect human sounds with individuals. A parrot can answer questions about properties and relationships. Dolphins can follow symbolic combinations in which order changes meaning, and elephants may address one another individually. No non-human animal has demonstrated the complete, flexible, open-ended language system humans use. But lacking human language is not the same as understanding nothing. They understand layers. They hear sound patterns, emotional melodies, identities, intentions, predictions, actions, and in some cases, genuine references to objects or relationships. The next time you talk to an animal, remember that the words are only one channel. Your voice, face, movement, history, and the animal's own sensory world are speaking at the same time. It may understand less of the sentence than you imagine. It may understand more of the situation than you realize. And the meaning that reaches its mind may not be human at all. It may be dog, cat, parrot, dolphin, horse, or elephant meaning. Not a copy of our world, but a translation into theirs. Subscribe to Wild Wonders for more journeys into the hidden minds of animals.